Kid Icarus 2 is certainly one of the games of all time. Not really surprising nobody talks about it much. Huh. I wonder what that could be. Hopefully he isn't going through my trash again. Oh, it appears that I've received a cease and desist letter from Nintendo on the grounds of copyright infringement. Well, I suppose that tracks, but what exactly does that entail? What are they gonna do to me? Do people even know who the Ice Climbers are outside of Super Smash Bros? Ice Climber was one of the initial launch titles for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and was even a pack-in title in some European countries. It was one of the 30 titles that made up the Black Box series of games, with it being part of the Action series. The most noteworthy thing about the game's development is that this was the first video game to be programmed by Kazuki Morita, who has served as a programmer, program director, and supervisor on many titles in the Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, and Star Fox series, who has in the past referred to the game as his warm-up on the NES, before taking on the task of working as a programmer on the original Super Mario Bros., which in many eyes would go on to address much of the criticism that was directed towards Ice Climber. Not much else is really documented about the development of the game as far as I can tell. I mean, there is one piece of unused content, being the spread of Popo aiming his hammer upward, which never happens in game. Truly the most groundbreaking reveal that will recontextualize a lot about the game. But that's about it, really. Wait, hold on. Have you ever noticed how the US box art depicts Nana as red? It's strange, since both the Japanese box art and in-game sprite depict her as pink. Makes me wonder if this is where the trophy description in Smash got it from. Ice Climber stars Popo and Nana, who are friends? Siblings? Failed clone experiments? The relationship between the two was never really stated by the original developers of the game. However, when discussing their inclusion in Melee, Sakurai referred to them as childhood friends. Since this is the closest thing to an official answer we have, I shall take this as canon. In the game, Popo and Nana must scale up 32 different mountains to recover their stolen vegetables from a condor. Thankfully, they've come prepared, as they have their trusty ice hammers to carve openings in the ice, as well as to defend themselves against the creatures they come across. Be it a polar bear with some stylish sunglasses and shorts who will push the floor down, a nitpicker who will fly towards you, or these little yeti-like creatures called Topi, who will push ice forward to fill in whatever openings you've made. In the original Japanese release, Topis are portrayed as blue seals. It's been speculated that the change was made due to the controversy surrounding seal clubbing in the Western world. Now, how does the game feel to play? I'd say it's most comparable to Mario Bros, with how when you jump, you're basically committing to that jump, as you do not have the ability to alter your movement in midair. Not to mention, you also need to be exact with your positioning to truly land on the platform, so you need to have some patience when planning out your next move. This is understandable given the time that it was released, but it is an aspect of the game that makes it much harder to get into nowadays due to being spoiled by titles like the original Super Mario Bros., redefining how the movement of the player should feel. As the game progresses, it gets increasingly more challenging as levels start to get more complex, as they introduce ice physics, conveyor belts, and a greater focus on more precision-based platforming. I feel this manages to give the game more variety, though if you're not a fan of how it feels to play, then mechanics such as this are bound to make it more frustrating for you. I think the worst part would probably be the moving platforms, as they can be an utter pain to jump onto in later levels when they're much smaller. On that note, that can also be best seen with the bonus stages. At the end of each stage, the player is presented with a brand new segment, where they must platform their way up to the condor by collecting various vegetables, which add up to give the player more points, as well as potential extra lives. However, you are given a time limit consisting of 40 seconds, so you must be quick when doing so. When playing multiplayer, both your scores will even be compared at the end to determine who the winner is. However, this part is entirely optional. If you mess up at any point, it just brings you to the next level. As for the presentation, I think it's neat. I find that many of the game sprites look kinda cute and charming to me. I especially dig the sprite for the polar bear. It's for sure on the simplistic side compared to many later titles that would really push the console to its limits, but I think it manages to pull through, especially for a title very early on in the system's life. I find the soundtrack is also fairly solid. There's only a handful of tracks, but I think they fit pretty well. The stage select theme is definitely the most underrated of the bunch. However, that might also just be because it was never remixed in Smash, so it's not nearly as well known. I'm sending this message to everyone with limbs, and is currently failing at having a life. You should come over and play Ice Climber with me. It's not like you're doing anything better with your time.
I'll have you know that I've been spending my time wisely. Researching Junji Ito is no easy...
Just stop talking and grab the controller already. I'd say the highlight of the game is without a doubt its multiplayer. While most of the other titles in the launch lineup for the NES had players take turns with one another, Ice Climber stood out with its inclusion of simultaneous multiplayer. I'd argue it's probably where the game shines most, as it's fun just messing around with a buddy, competing to see who can get to the top first, and get the most vegetables, or working together by taking advantage of their ability to footstool jump off each other.
No wonder the Cuphead devs wanted Cuphead to get into Smash and demolish them. This game blows.
This is the last time I'm letting you inside the house. As a result, it's not too surprising that the game's multiplayer was ultimately the deciding factor for their inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Melee as the rep for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Wait, did you think that was it? Well, not by a long shot. Over the years, the original Ice Climber has had a number of different re-releases, spanning across the grand majority of Nintendo system. You're most likely familiar with its recent re-releases as part of the Virtual Console for the Wii, Wii U, and Nintendo 3DS, as well as being one of the many games included with Nintendo Switch Online. The only one of the lineup with any substantial differences is the NSO release, which is the main version I played for this video. Since with Nintendo Switch Online, you can play any of these titles with another person, regardless of where they live. I'm very glad that we live in a world where New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe wasn't given online multiplayer, but Ice Climber was. This is probably the version of the game I'd recommend to anyone interested in trying it out. It's also featured as one of the base games you can try out in Super Smash Bros. Brawl's Masterpiece Selection, where it rightfully belongs. The demo starts you out in a stage as Popo, where you're given 40 seconds to go through it. I think I've seen advertisements longer than the amount of time you're given to play the game, but hey, it's a nice inclusion nonetheless. Well, as long as you're not playing the Korean version, where it just doesn't exist. However, those aren't the only recent re-release of Ice Climber. Included as one of the 22 titles consistent between both models/regions, Ice Climber is playable on the NES Classic Edition, so for those who want to have a more authentic feeling experience while still having modern day features like save states, this is the one for you. Just make sure that you don't order the show and jump version by mistake. Meanwhile, the Game Boy Advance actually had two different releases of the NES version of Ice Climber. Initially, in 2002, you could purchase a pack of 5 cards that you could then scan with the Nintendo e-reader and gain access to the game. 2 years later, the game would see another release as part of the Classic NES series. It was one of the 13 titles to see a release in the United States. Thankfully, both versions do retain the game's multiplayer mode, now just locked behind link cable support. This was a concern at the time, as other titles part of the Classic NES series such as Bomberman lack such a feature, despite being a selling point for their original counterparts. Now, which of these was a better investment at the time, assuming you already had an e-reader? Well, the e-reader pack was $5 at its retail price, while the Classic NES series release was $20. Unless you really like how the box and cartridge attempt to invoke the same vibe as the game's original packaging, I don't really see why you wouldn't go with the e-reader pack. Truth be told, however, I don't believe most sane human beings are going to go out of their way to own more than one copy of Ice Climber for the Game Boy Advance. So, one might wonder, hey, sorry for the interruption. Don't mind her. She's a silly fella. She forgot to bring up something that always felt a bit strange to her. The PlayChoice 10 was an arcade machine that could play up to 10 different games that were previously available on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Players would insert change to play the selected game for a period of time. Unlike other noteworthy releases, these versions of those games were identical to their home counterparts in terms of gameplay, nor were they ever released in Japan. Despite having gotten the Versus treatment like Super Mario Bros., Ice Climber was never one of the games playable on the PlayChoice 10. But don't you worry one bit. You could play Yo-Noid. Clearly they had priorities. Well, that was fun. See ya! So, one might wonder with how accessible the game is nowadays, what is the rarest version of Ice Climber? Well, have you heard of this little series known as Animal Crossing? While the series didn't truly become the household name it is nowadays till the GameCube, the first game was originally a Japanese exclusive Nintendo 64 game, with the GameCube entry actually being an enhanced port. Now you might be wondering how exactly this is relevant. Well, in both versions of the game, you can actually collect and play a handful of different NES titles. In the original, there was a total of 8 games. 7 of them could be unlocked through normal methods, As for the 8th,
Well...
Ice Climber was originally shown off as one of the titles you could play when the game was showcased at Space World 2000, alongside Clue-Clue-Land, Donkey Kong, and Balloon Fight. But when the game came out, it was noticeably missing from the lineup you could obtain through in-game methods. However, that didn't mean it wasn't playable. Instead, you had to get it through external means. For those around in 2001 and were familiar with the magazine Nintendo Dream, Volume 58 detailed a contest that you could enter. In order to have a chance at winning, you needed to write to the magazine's editorial department about your thoughts on the game by June 21st of that year to win a prize. Winners would obtain a special letter from the game's producer, with a disk system item attached, as well as a special memory pack that could be loaded and played in-game, allowing them to unlock Ice Climber. The ROM for Ice Climber doesn't actually exist in the N64 cartridge. Instead, it's being loaded entirely off of the memory pack. In an issue released the following day, Famitsu Weekly held their own separate giveaway, where another 30 were given away. With that in mind, how many are there in existence? 60. There are only 60. So let's just say I'll probably never get my hands on this. Certainly there's gotta be cheaper ways of playing Ice Climber in Animal Crossing. Well, there is! You just need 2 game consoles, 2 accessories, and a particular e-reader card. I said it was cheaper, not that you wouldn't need to invest in a loan. As mentioned before, Animal Crossing made its international release with an upgraded port for the GameCube. Unlike the original, there are now 19 NES games. However, only 8 of them are obtainable from typical means, with 2 being able to be found on the island, 5 that were part of Nintendo giveaways, and 4 that aren't obtainable without external assistance. Those titles were Mario Bros., Ice Climber, Super Mario Bros., and The Legend of Zelda. Super Mario Bros. Was originally obtained by entering a sweepstakes, where 30 memory cards containing it were given away. Wait, why does this sound so familiar? Meanwhile, Zelda could only be obtained by cheating. As for the other 2, there is a means of obtaining them legitimately. Now, how do you unlock them? Well, for Ice Climber, you could always transfer your save data over from the original Nintendo 64 release, if you have that. But if you wanted to get it in the US, well, it required getting a pack of the Series 4 Animal Crossing e-reader cards, which single packs had the possibility of containing one of the 2 classic game cards, which when used in-game would give you access to the respective NES title. The design of the card features 2 villagers sitting down and playing said title on their NES. The back of the card even includes a description of the title. Similar to the character cards, when scanned on their own, the classic game cards will display a message from Tom Nook giving you some thoughtful advice. What a guy. While I'm not much of an Animal Crossing connoisseur, I think these are pretty cute and a fairly decent use of the e-reader, especially in regards to the series of e-reader cards that were actually released here, since quite a handful never made it outside of Japan.
But Popo, what about Animal Crossing E+? You know, the expansion of the original GameCube version that was released exclusively for Japan in 2003 that introduced a handful of new characters, gameplay mechanics, and even functionality with the e-reader.
Look, please just stop talking. I don't mean to offend the Poco community, but this version of the game is irrelevant. While they kept most of the NES titles intact, even keeping the North American designs, the Forbidden 4 were made unattainable via any normal means, and all that remains is some leftover data in the game's files. Even then, if you were to even manage to get it in your inventory, you would be unable to place it down in your house, meaning there is no Ice Climber to speak of. Perhaps this is the rarest version of Ice Climber featured in Animal Crossing, since it doesn't even exist. Now, if you're in the mood for unconventional means of playing Ice Climber, you could always spend years of your life hunting down a copy for the PC-8801, which for those unaware was a Zilog Z80 based home computer released by the Nippon Electric Company. In the mid-80s, Nintendo licensed Hudson Soft, a company best known for the Bomberman series and early Mario Party entries, to port several Famicom titles to it. Those titles consisted of Balloon Fight, Ice Climber, Tennis, and Golf. However, alongside those, they also created their own original takes on Mario Bros. And Donkey Kong 3, alongside a sequel to the original Super Mario Bros. Now, how was the port of Ice Climber handled? Well, for the time it was released, it looks fairly impressive and is quite faithful in a lot of ways, managing to get close to capturing the original gameplay style and presentation. However, Unfortunately, it doesn't really look like a version I'd recommend playing outside of the novelty factor, given the frame rate, color palette, and sound effects, which leaves this as something I respect more than I actually enjoy. We've talked about versions of Ice Climber that required the e-reader, a memory card, and even entirely different games to play. But what about a version of the game that required an amiibo to play it, long before the Ice Climbers even had one? Well, I have an amiibo tap for you. What is an amiibo tap, most members of the population are asking? Well, Amiibo Tap, Nintendo's Greatest Bits, is a now delisted app that was released for the Wii U in 2015, where people could scan amiibos in order to try out scenes from a total of 30 selected NES and Super Nintendo games. So, with the power of amiibos, you can get free demos of many iconic titles. But you may be wondering, how do you get Ice Climber when there wasn't an Ice Climber amiibo yet? Well, it's simple. No matter what the amiibo is, it will always give you a random game. So Fox could get you Super Metroid, and Donkey Kong could get you Balloon Fight. There's no rhyme or reason to what you get. Oh yeah, should I also point out that this game was released during a time where amiibos were incredibly hard to even get your hands on? There's a pretty clear reason why nobody remembers this game. If you want to experience moments and scenes from your favorite NES classics on the Wii U, you're better off checking out the NES Remix series instead. Easily one of the most underrated titles that come out of the Wii U's library. Up until this point, I've held off on mentioning the most unique and surprisingly easily accessible release of the game in the modern day, that being Versus Ice Climber, which was part of Nintendo's Versus series of arcade machines. This series consisted of various Famicom titles such as the original Super Mario Bros., heavily altered to fit the arcade format, with a greater focus on multiplayer and oftentimes the inclusion of original content. Ice Climber was no exception to this, as it had its entire structure changed. The player now chooses from an initial set of 24 mountains to play through. After completing 8 of them, the player is then sent to the Super Bonus stage, which unlike the regular one, is now strictly centered on platforming instead of also collecting vegetables. After completing the bonus stage, you gain access to a brand new selection of 24 mountains, which contain brand new palettes and a giant butterfly replacing the condor. While a good majority of the 48 levels are the same as its NES counterpart, 18 of them are brand new and feature mechanics and enemies that weren't previously seen before, such as bursts of wind, diagonal moving platforms, and the dreaded bee. The game's soundtrack has also been modified and expanded upon, which is a welcomed addition. Heck, the title screen is even animated now, with Popo and Nana coming in to create the logo for the game. Though this does come at the cost of having title screen music, so while it's a neat inclusion, I'm not sure if I'd call that a complete upgrade. As a whole, Versus Ice Climber is probably the most bang for your buck version of the game. It still shares a lot of the same elements that people critique the NES version for. But if you're a fan of Ice Climber and are craving more content, then I'd say it does a pretty serviceable job. Now, one might wonder how one is even meant to play this game in the modern day. Well, you could always hunt down an arcade that still has the cabinet just hanging out in the back. However, it was actually ported to the Nintendo Switch as part of the Arcade Archives back in 2019, so this version of the game is now more widely accessible. If anything, without Nintendo Switch Online, it's the only way for you to play Ice Climber. Now you might be wondering how the game was received critically. In regards to the American release, the magazine, Computer Entertainer, reported that they found it addictive for fans of climbing games, with the title receiving 3.5 stars out of 4 in both the categories of graphics and gameplay. Supposedly, one of the former presidents of Finland was reported to be keen on Nintendo games, and had considered Ice Climber to be his favorite game, according to his son-in-law. Clearly, Finland knows what's up. However, in the modern day, I think it's safe to say Ice Climber really isn't all that popular of a game. It's rarely brought up in discussions, unless people are talking about the full lineup of the NES launch titles, or their inclusion in Super Smash Bros., which is ultimately where most people nowadays first learned about them. Like, if you were to go up to someone in person and ask them, "Hey, what are your thoughts on Ice Climber?" What do you think they would say?
Ice Climber is a game that I respect a lot more than I like. Obviously, due to it being an early NES game, you should come to expect that it'll be rooted down by janky programming and arcade-like design. But without it, it wouldn't have helped pave the way for later NES classics, namely Super Mario Bros. So credit where credit is due, I have to hand it to Popo and Nana for bringing about the success of everyone's favorite Italian paisano.
It's, it's okay. You know, just your, standard little arcade style high score based romp. Pretty simple, pretty repetitive, like most games at the time. Yeah, not much to say. I don't have a strong opinion on it.
Like, it's pretty mid, man. I don't know. They should have added Mock Rider to Smash instead. Also, how did you get in my house, man?
So yeah, I think it's safe to say you're not going to see many people discuss it in the same way they do titles such as the original Super Mario Bros., Metroid, or even Kid Icarus. Despite that, the game still tends to get acknowledged in a lot of later Nintendo media, even outside of Super Smash Bros. And everyone's favorite entry of the Pikmin series, Hey Pikmin! One of the treasures you can come across is a copy of the game titled Revenge Fantasy. In Super Mario Maker, Nana and Popo appear as an unlockable mystery mushroom costume you can use in the Super Mario Bros. 1 theme of the game. Most recently, in the Super Mario Bros. Film made by Illumination, the polar bear can be seen in a few scenes, while Popo and Nana are alluded to in one of the headlines on TV. Those are only a handful of examples. There's far more I could bring up. So even though their original game might not have left the same cultural impact as some of Nintendo's other IPs, it's nice to see that they haven't been forgotten and are still being treated as one of the NES main legacy series by Nintendo, which shows that even if a game is dated and has its flaws, you can still find something to enjoy from it and appreciate what it helped to create. Well, given the situation that I'm in, thanks to that whole cease and desist letter, I'm very much at risk of losing my livelihood, my home, my reputation, potentially even my mere existence, so I might end up having to resort to fighting fire with fire if Nintendo truly wants to go down this route. So, here's my game plan. I recently started work on my brand new game, and I'm ready to finally share it with the public. I present to you Ice Climber 2 for the Game Boy.
What the hell? What could possibly be wrong with me?
You're not an RPG guy.
I went through character development,